Ah. All right, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Appropriation versus Appreciation. My culture is not a costume. My name is Daisy Hahn. I'm the founder and CEO of Embracing Equity, and I'm thrilled to have all of you here with us today for what I know will be a very important and insightful conversation. Halloween is tomorrow, and many of us are excited to dress up, enjoy the festivities, celebrate. So we want to hear from you. Drop in the chat. What are you dressing up for as Halloween? And what questions do you have about cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation? Let us know. Let's interact throughout this live webinar and really interrogate, this opportunity and responsibility to think critically about how our costume choices can impact others, especially when those costumes involve elements of another person's culture. Today's discussion isn't just about costumes. It's really about respect, understanding, and inclusivity. So we're going to explore the difference between cultural appropriation and cultural appreciation, how we can celebrate and engage with other cultures in a way that is respectful and responsible. And here to have this conversation are three of my incredible colleagues and friends, Rashi Joade, Natani Lim, and Dr. Nicole Noel Evans. We have a couple witches and a pink lady. So we're really excited to hear from you all. And I wanted to pass it to you to first introduce a little bit about yourself and also share an example where you've seen for yourself or encountered a Halloween costume that maybe made you feel a little uncomfortable. Maybe even it's your own costume in hindsight. And I ask this specifically here as an opener for us to be able to model that we are all learners. We're on a lifelong journey to learn how to live in alignment with our values. This is not about policing each other or shaming each other. It's really about getting closer to our values and making choices that aligns with them. So I thank you in advance for being vulnerable and really going there in your own sharing of your mistakes. So in that spirit, I will share personally that my own 4-year-old daughter this Halloween wanted to be Moana this year. And I was very conflicted about this because it is this commodification of various Polynesian cultures, and yet is also a really powerful role model for girls of color and specifically girls who are Polynesian to see themselves in media in that kind of way, as a heroine in that kind of way. And so my daughter is 4. So I have attempted to have this conversation with her. We're going to dive deeper into this. And she struggles to understand the full meaning of cultural appropriation. But as a 4-year-old, she told me yesterday that she changed her mind anyway, and she wants to be Bluey. So I'm still curious about how to dive into that as like a case study and how we would approach these conversations with children. But that is something, it's a dilemma that is in real time happening for me. And I'll pass it to Dr. Nicole Noel Evans to share.
Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Nicole Evans. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And a little bit about me. I've been in the education sector for a long time. I'm the child of an educator. And then I served as a teacher and administrator in the public school setting. Currently, I'm super excited to serve as the Senior Director of Leadership at Embracing Equity, where I've had the honor of working with adults who want to transform their environments and ensure that they're centering equity and anti-racism, and that they're showing up for webinars like this to learn more, to challenge, to learn, to unlearn. And as for me, I had lots of experiences as a classroom teacher. We had a Halloween parade, so in the whole school saw people dressed up, in cultures that were not their own. I remember as a child, one of my favorite costumes was a Native American, having the headband with the feather, looking for moccasins to wear, and the dress, and even, oh, this is going to be an ouch, but I'm going to say it, in St. Louis, when you go for trick-or-treating, the tradition is to tell a joke or to say something to elaborate on your costume. And so I remember even saying, how, that if many of you, I know I'm dating myself, a lot of the movies from back in the day, that was the greeting of Native Americans to white folks. You said that, right? That was what you said. And so remember practicing it so that people would know and understand my costume. So that's something that I don't proudly speak about, but it is something, even I remember to this day, how now, as I'm learning and unlearning, how damaging that was for me to perpetuate that, and for people who love me go shopping for the costume, that kind of thing. So that's something, and I see it all the time. I saw it all the time as an educator. Another thing that I just quickly like to point to, I'm just thinking back, we get a lot of our information from TV, from shows, from celebrities. And one of the things I remember, and we're going to talk about this later, the difference between appropriation and appreciation. In 2018, Luann de Lesseps of the Real Housewives of New York reality show, she dressed up as Diana Ross. She had a big old afro. But it was like, it wasn't even a regular afro. It was super tall, super big, in sort of a mocking way. And the piece for me, she darkened her skin with makeup. That part is where you cross the line. And again, we'll talk about it later, but that's modern day blackface. And so those are some things that come to mind immediately around this topic.
Yeah, wow. Powerful examples, like very visceral. And like you said, it is like cringy, right? Because the more you learn, the more you know.
Yes.
And the more you know, you can do better.
Yes.
So thank you for sharing that, Dr. Evans. Rashi, can you share next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Rashi Jawade. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Chief Strategy Officer at Embracing Equity. And my foray actually into education was through law school as an attorney. So I was a law school intern for Baltimore City Schools. And it made me realize two things. That the legal system is just a reactive system, right? It punishes you after the fact. Mm-hmm. And ideally, we want to be taking preventative measures. So the second thing it taught me is that education actually could be a lever of one of those, could be a preventative measure, right? Could be a lever for change. So that I've spent over the last decade, I'm dating myself, closer to 2 decades now, doing just that. So working in education, working within organizations and communities so that we're making learning spaces, learning communities more inclusive and equitable for everybody, right? For adults and for children. So my costume actually that I still remember feeling some discomfort with is, so I grew up in India till I was 12, and then I moved here when I was 12 in 8th grade, so not the best time. And I literally moved at the beginning of October. And Halloween is like maybe, 2 or 3 weeks later. And so I remember my parents just being like, wear like an Indian outfit, wear like a lenga or whatever, and just go as an Indian princess, right? And I was like, yeah. And at home, I was like, yeah, that's a great idea. Like, no problems. But then as I was actually going trick-or-treating, like door to door, that's when I was feeling like, oh, why does this feel like uncomfortable? Like, why does it feel like I don't know. When I was at that age as a 12-year-old, I didn't really understand everything, right? Now I realize, because all of my associations, were cultural. They were not costumey, right? It wasn't like a switch that I could just turn on and be like, oh, now this is a costume. And so even as a kid, I remember feeling, kind of out of place. And even like the following year, I was like, I made sure I had a costume, so I would not be in that dilemma again. So yeah, that's still one of those ouch moments that I remember viscerally.
Yeah.
It's quite a ways ago.
Wow. And what an adjustment to come in to American culture at that age and with this holiday. Welcome to America. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Rashi. Thank you. And Nitani?
Yeah, thanks for sharing, everybody. Hi, everyone. I'm Natani Lynn. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm a project manager for Embracing Equity based in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My background is in early childhood and special education. I've been an educator for 22 years or so. I'm a mom to a beautiful 10-year-old daughter who also we navigate all of the dressing up stuff and all the talks. And I'm a co-owner of the Dancing Turtle, which is a local breaking studio in Albuquerque. So my own personal experience I can remember being young and not so much when I lived in Chicago, but like stepping out of that to the suburbs. And we would, I would dress up. I think I remember dressing up as like She-Ra and I think Rainbow Bright, or like, so always characters that were like cartoony and things that, were on TV. But I do remember seeing adults and teens, like older teens, I would say, dressing up, like trying to look Mexican. So the sombreros on and the ponchos on, holding tequila bottles or maracas and wearing mustaches, trying to dress like mariachis. And I was pretty shocked because most of them were white folks wearing these things, and it was really uncomfortable because, one, we don't dress like that. We don't on a day-to-day basis. That's not happening. And it made me just feel sad for my family because that's how we live. And yes, we do wear these things, but it is not a costume. It's either based on working on farms or it's a cultural component to how we were raised. So I remember that. And even as being a teenager, that like friends would try to dress up like that. And it was hard to have those conversations directly. And you'd laugh it off like, oh yeah. And especially when it was like drunk Mexican, right? Like, oh, that's like a thing. And for like nowadays too, I think for me growing up personally, we celebrated Dia de los Muertos probably a little bit more so than we did Halloween. Like Halloween was for the school when I went to school and I had friends as I got older, but we would set up our altar. Like those days kind of leading up are for a couple days and it's more ceremonial and it is a sacred time. And so for me, now I see people wearing like the calavera or calaca makeup, which is like the white makeup with all the designs, which that is, it's not the same holiday as Halloween. So it kind of gets conflated. Like it's, just kind of put it with Halloween. For us, we don't. So I have mixed feelings about this time of year because my own people and the way that we celebrate and hold space and honor our ancestors, it's not based on costume. It's not based on it's fun and it's joyful and it's family. So, and in New Mexico, there is a beautiful piece to how children are educated. My daughter even did like a little Dia de los Muertos mini altar for her family. And so there is education around it, yet it's also not really expressed that it's separate from Halloween, and it gets complicated. It's not just about wearing the calavera makeup. There's a lot of other components and food and all these things that go into it. So for me growing up, I think that was always like a I don't know, double things happening and trying to understand like, well, these are different and I'm little, but I don't know how to explain it.
Exactly. Yes. Thank you, Natani. Thanks for sharing that complexity. I myself am a child of immigrants. And so when my family, my parents who don't celebrate Halloween, they were like, what do you want to be? I was like, I want to be a teacher. So I literally dressed up as a teacher from the time I was 5 to 9 years old every Halloween and went trick-or-treating with a meter stick, like thinking it was like a career day or aspirational day. Um, and so it didn't really have like that like cultural, obviously that significance to me. And even as an adult or as a teenager trying to figure out these questions, like I asked a few friends like, oh, what would you do with if your child wanted to be Moana? And a lot of times people do dismiss the complexities and the cultural appropriation and the values that are at play here with this holiday as something like it's just for fun. It's
Right.
just like a silly thing. We're just dressing up. It's funny. It's just a fun, silly thing. And what embracing equity is we're a community that is striving to be conscientious, very much building up our critical consciousness, right, in every aspect of our lives, and
Yes.
questioning, is that like, what does this mean? What is the impact of this? And so I really appreciate that we're having this conversation and that all of you are here to engage really honestly in this, because it's not a straightforward answer. It is a very complicated holiday and it brings up a lot of questions. So we want to start off by defining these two big concepts: cultural appropriation, cultural appreciation. Right? Cultural appropriation is when elements of a culture, particularly those of marginalized or oppressed groups, are taken and used by people outside that culture, often in ways that misinterpret, misrepresent, disrespect, or exploit the original meaning and significance. Cultural appreciation, on the other hand, is about engaging with the culture in a way that honors its history, significance, and people. It's about learning, showing respect, and ensuring that the context and the meaning of those elements are preserved.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to, Halloween and these costumes, it's really easy to cross the line from appreciation into appropriation and trivialize through these costumes for something fun for one night, right? So
Yeah.
I guess I want to start off by asking each of you, why does it matter? What's the harm? What's the harm caused by cultural appropriation during Halloween?
I think I'll start off because I gave the example about blackface, right? So particularly for Black folks, blackface is problematic. It really perpetuates those deeply rooted stereotypes, racial stereotypes, and it still harms the dignity of Black individuals and the communities. So this originated in the 19th century minstrel shows, right? White performers were using blackface makeup to mock, demean, and dehumanize Black people, right? They were reinforcing stereotypes about the way that we spoke, the way that we even walked and moved, right? And it really, perpetuated that Black folks were less intelligent, subservient, or just inherently comedic. Like, I'm here to entertain you. And so those portrayals were really to entertain white audiences, but they exaggerated and they distorted Black features, Black speech, Black behaviors in ways that really perpetuated and accentuated racist beliefs. And so, to your point, Daisy, while blackface may seem like just a costume or just makeup to some, for Black folks in particular, it's a painful reminder of the legacy of systemic racism and oppression that Black communities continue to face today. Using that caricature of Black folks, it trivializes real experiences and identities. It also ignores the fact that Black people in the past were excluded from fair representation and real roles in media, right? It took jobs from Black folks. We can represent ourselves in acting and in movies. And so it really denied us that ability to portray ourselves authentically on stage and on screen. So in more recent years, it doesn't look like a white person wearing blackface, but in the example that I gave at the opening, it does look like a white person darkening their skin to show that they are, a Black person. And this is the collective impact of those kinds of things really underscores why cultural insensitivity or sensitivity and respectful representation is essential for fostering an inclusive society, right?
Yeah.
We can represent ourselves, and we can do it in a way that with honor and dignity, and that's representative. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Doc. I was gonna just like on that note about the devaluing and like just the day, like Daisy was saying, like it's just a day. It's just, oh, it's all in good fun. We don't mean harm here. Just that one day though, for like an Indigenous child or for a family to feel just put in this place of being very dehumanized when you not all, the stable costume, which I was really surprised. I went to our Spirit Halloween place, which I don't ever really do. And they didn't have any. Finally, this year, they had nothing about Native costumes, which I was so impressed and like really, so shout out to them over here. But typically, it's like, oh, well, because they saw it in Peter Pan, or like it's just cartoony. And it's always the same costume, as we know, which represents the Plains Indians, which is, again, this concept of it's a monolith. Indigenous people all wear feathers. They have this kind of stuff. They wear the paint on their face. That's how they are. And so that perspective is so put in the past of where Native folks are, not amplified like a Deb Haaland or people that we see that are in current, times that are doing amazing things, right? And that are not dressed this way. So that representation of silly and mockery and a child that's Indigenous, especially here in our community, feels hurtful. And there's nothing silly, funny, or whatever about it. The impact can be those next days feeling like after Halloween, like, wow, okay, well, we're funny, or why do people think of us this way? So it is that harm that's caused on people, whether or not you think it's fun. And it does not come from a place of appreciation, because many times if I see people out there wearing these things to be cute or whatever they're doing, it feels like they don't even know, they don't know any education around Indigenous people. And again, that same thing of like walking out with my daughter, am I going to have a 30-minute conversation trying, it's like trying to educate her, like, see how this is hurtful. This causes harm. This is not okay. Nobody should be doing this to a people's culture. So that same kind of piece of feeling like it's not just you're making fun of my people. So it doesn't actually feel good at all.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll add, plus a million to everything Dr. Evans and Natani have said, I also feel like at the end of the day, Halloween is the commodification, right, of a holiday, right? At the end of the day. And when like Spirit Halloween is selling you Native American costumes or Indian costumes or whatever costumes, like what Native American nations or tribal nations are seeing any of that, right? And so not only are we commodifying, these cultural symbols that have meaning, but we're exploiting them to make profit that never actually even goes back to those cultures.
That part.
Right? And so it's like Halloween, yes, is one day, but there's a lot of money that gets spent around that one day, right?
Yeah.
And so let's take the exploitation of cultural symbols out of that at least.
Absolutely. Absolutely, y'all. Thank you so much. That's very, very clear on the harm that's caused by cultural appropriation. And I think like if you have that intention, you're like, okay, I don't want to be appropriating other people's culture. How do you decipher what is genuine appreciation and what is cultural appropriation? And Embracing Equity did share in our social media and in our newsletter. We'll drop in the chat how to sign up for the newsletter so you're up to date on the latest from us. But we did share today some self-reflection questions that can guide you in determining for yourself if it is verging or crossing the line to cultural appropriation. We have, does your costume have the same cultural significance to you as it does to the people of its original culture? Do people perceive and react the same way to you as they would to someone of that culture wearing the same thing? Who is gaining a profit from you wearing it? Is there a stereotype associated? If it's a character, was that character an accurate depiction of a person from that culture, right? Those are some great starting points for helping you to reflect on your own costume choice. I'm curious if you three can also share some support, some tools, some support, some tips on how to be able to differ cultural appropriation, cultural appreciation.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rashi. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I thought about this question because growing up in the US, I have a lot of non-Indian American friends, right? I have a lot of friends that come from a lot of different cultures. And, I remember like at my, college graduation party, everybody was going to be wearing Indian outfits. And so I was like, oh, I want you to actually wear some of my Indian outfits so we can all, I can share my culture with you. And this can actually be a shared experience, right? That is now very different. If one of my friends decided to wear one of those outfits as a costume, I would still be offended, right? Yeah. Because the invitation to share in my culture for an event that I want you to feel included in as my friend is very different than wearing that, again, on a commodified holiday as a costume, right? Because it clearly doesn't hold the same cultural significance. So I feel like for me, like that's a clear distinction of like appreciation and appropriation, even with the same clothes.
Yes. That's a great distinction. The other thing is I like the questions that we threw out there. And here's some more that I would start always here. Self-reflection. So start with curiosity for yourself. The first question that I would ask if thinking about showing up in someone else as someone else, if you will, do I belong to this group? Is this a part of my culture and my personal identity? And one of the last questions that I really, really would ask, would I wear this if I were around people of this group uninvited, right? Different from Rashi saying, hey, you're coming to my event, I'm inviting you. But would I just simply show up if I were around this group? And if that will pinch me, if the answer is no to any of those three questions, then the answer is no, don't. If you have to alter your skin in any way, no. Do I need? Yeah. Okay. So those are some guiding questions that you can ask yourself. And what it is for people go, oh, now that's no fun. It's honoring. I want to do this to honor. There are so many ways to have fun and respect one another without this. That's what I would say. Self-reflection.
Yeah. And I think the other part too to this is doing a lot of stuff leading up to those, like to the holiday, like not waiting until your friends show up or the people show up and it's like, oh, what? Like, because nobody's going to ask you. It's like they're in their own bubble, doing their costume and whatever. So I really do think leading up to that point, you have to have some of those conversations or dialogue or even sharing stories like what I said today, like being able to tell that in front of friends before they start talking about, the holiday or whatever. It's that it's transparent, right? Is it going to demean people or is it going to value them? And really ask like how you both are saying, right? Like asking those questions. If your friend, is Mexican like me and you show up looking like that, am I going to feel good? Okay. If I'm not, then don't wear it. Right. So I think it's also really thinking of ahead of time, what are some of those dialogues, conversations, and things? We do them with kids, right? Like we do them with kids all the time. And I think sometimes we forget to look at our own circles and people that are around us. Also, hoping that we're around circles that we potentially wouldn't even have to have those conversations. But for those situations, like for my daughter, like at school and things like that, I feel a lot more comfortable at the PTA meetings or whatever, just to, if they start talking about Halloween, usually there's a couple parents that are already saying like, we have, definitely if it's me, like another Asian parent, a multiracial parent, then we're a little bit more vocal. But I think it's happening before the holidays actually here.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are great points. Thank you all. Well, so let's dive into a couple scenarios. The first one with adults and the second with children. The first one is, let's say a friend is planning on wearing a costume that involves a sacred cultural symbol. How do you approach the conversation?
Maybe I can.
Go ahead.
So I feel like in general, when I am faced with anything that I deem insensitive, problematic, whatever, if I'm in a relationship with that person, I try to approach it with curiosity, right? And so instead of just being like shame and guilt, that's wrong, and take it off, right? And so that doesn't usually work in my experience. And so I think I would maybe ask questions and say, hey, like what made you, like, why are you wearing this costume? Why this costume? What is the goal? Are you trying to evoke a feeling? Are you trying to represent something? Like, is this a statement? Like, what is it? And is there a way to convey your message without appropriating somebody's cultural symbol, right?
Yeah.
So having a conversation and a dialogue that is like, hey, what's at the root of this? Because very few people are going to die on the hill that I just want to wear this one symbol or this one thing, right? Like, what are you trying to do? Why? What's the goal? And then can we achieve that in other ways?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, actually, I think too, for me, it's like I get super upset right away. So I always have to like take a step and breathe and take a moment for myself, because I have to like assess where I'm at, who's around me, if there's kids there, like how am I going to make this a moment, like you're saying, that's not hurt, like trying to cause people to feel bad in that moment and not want to lean into learning. So I also feel like when you're kind of like, reactive, it's also better to take a second and really just that, because it has happened to me before where I have said something and my, it was my friend's friend and they got super irritated, like left and didn't, whatever. And of course, then I get looked at like, you're trying to pick a fight on Halloween. And so I think I've learned from that moment to also just kind of lean out. And I've learned to lean on some other friends that might know these folks to be like, hey, maybe my white friend can ally up and like ask something. So it's not always like me having to say something too, but really taking a moment is important for sure.
Yeah. And to really extend on what both of you all said, educate versus attack, right? I think sometimes it does bring up those feelings and you just want to like take it off right now, is maybe your first reaction to, oh my gosh, I cannot believe you wore that, right? So, again, curiosity, asking questions, say more about what you've decided to wear and how you're dressing up. And then educating. Did you know that what you're wearing is sacred or a cultural, traditional piece of clothing for fill in the blank, that culture, right? Just assuming goodwill, assuming that they may not have even understood or known that that was it. So approaching from curiosity and educating so that they can make the decision for themselves and just say, I'd be happy, and offering, I'd be happy to help you think of something else.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. That's great. Yeah. And that's very much the embracing equity ethos of educating versus attacking, right? Shame-free learning. What about with children? Since children are naturally curious, they love to express themselves through dressing up. How do we nurture that self-expression and the joy? And what are some respectful ways to learn about and appreciate a culture without taking it out of context and appropriating that culture?
I think for me, like I said, up to leading to holidays, especially this one, and I worked at pre-K. So it's like sometimes it's a little easier because you can have characters in books and you can use like, cartoon things like so it's easier, a little bit easier sometimes. But of course it's always the families, like educating that whole perspective, like that whole group is different. So I really kind of gave space to like talk about it more openly. Like, what are you going to be? Because of course we all know as teachers for like a month and a half, they're talking about what they're going to be, what they're going to be. And so I'd wait for some of those little moments to kind of chime in. And then if there was something I felt like maybe was going to be like, I think one year was a little girl was going to be a genie or something of that nature. And it was tricky because we didn't have kiddos in the class that represented that culture. So we, in a very roundabout way, came back to it, talking about those things like the culture of where that comes from at a very pre-K level, and real actual photos of like a people that, where these stories or traditions and things come from. But I'd always share that with the families, like in a newsletter. So I think it is true. How can we think of nurturing that creativity really is in the way we model it. And I was sharing with this group too, that I would just really push my kids sometimes to be like, you should be something really different. Like what can we think of that's like a lot of people don't dress up as? And we'd always kind of make this little list, like everybody was a Batman and a Spider-Man. Like there'd be a billion Batmans and Spider-Mans. And then you just never knew where the family was coming from. But if I could do my due diligence in the classroom by, talking about stories and pulling out characters, you really can make it a moment where these things can be really creative. I think we have lost a lot of that in some regard in classrooms. Like, spooky stuff is great. I think that that's fun. But then I think people just kind of, whatever, and they lose touch and they don't really check in. But there's such an opportunity to have our kiddos be more creative and think of things outside the box, and parents to pursue that too. And that is a part of play. Dress up is a huge part, right? That it just develops you to kind of, I don't know, pretend to be somebody else, and you kind of can get these new little skill sets. So I think it's really naming that too outside of this holiday. What are you doing to foster like those types of, I don't know, learnings when it comes to dress up, when it comes to role play, all of those things? Because then I think it becomes a lot more normalized too, to be just different, not to be what everybody else is.
So as an early childhood educator, Natani, with expertise in this age group, I'm wondering, how would you start that conversation with Alden, who's 4, about her choice of wanting to be Moana for Halloween?
I would always ask, like, well, why are you so interested in that character? Like, what about that character makes you feel excited that you want to be? And that allows them to share, like, well, I like Moana. It's usually going to be the thing. But some kids will say, well, they look like me and their skin's like me, and all, just these things that make, and it's exciting for them. So then it would always be like, well, do you know? And luckily with the situation, I did have my friend who was Hawaiian, so I could like ask. And I think coming back, if I didn't know what to say right away, it would be like, well, do you know Moana comes from a real people in the cartoon? It's fun and how it's exciting. But let's maybe think about these people. And for pre-K, I think it's pictures. Pictures speak 1,000 words, right? So looking at Hawaii, looking at the people, looking at, they have their tattoos and things. It's not painted. It's many times it is part of their family, where they come from in their community. So I think it's those little moments where you can say, especially for that age group, photos just do a lot. Because then you're saying that this is them doing like their dinner for the family and the community. It's not a movie. This is really what they do in their community. So I would lean a lot on like the photos, and coming back to, if I didn't know directly, I would then ask one of my friends or buddies or teachers, like, oh, hey, can you help me a little bit with maybe some things I can share?
Yeah, almost like offering a counter narrative to the Disney movie and actually providing real life,
right,
examples and education.
I love that.
Exactly.
I love it. Thank you.
I love that.
Dr. Evans, Rashi, do you all have any thoughts on
that? Yeah, but I do want to circle back for just quickly, and then I'll get into
please.
When we're talking about adults, right? And we said, ask questions, approach with curiosity, educate, not attack. And I also want us to balance that with not centering a right to comfort, right? If this is something that you've seen that upsets you, I think we should convey that to an adult. If an adult is dressed up, I think it's okay to say, hold on, right? This is upsetting to see that you are dressed in this way, and here are the reasons why. And I have some questions to ask you now and to ask you later, to have you ask yourself later as you're thinking about this next time. So I think if you, especially if you're in relationship with somebody, because we mentioned that if I'm in relationship with somebody, I ought to be able to call you in. I ought to be able to say, come here. Let me tell you the impact of you dressing up in that way. Maybe it wasn't your intention, but I need you to understand the impact that as a person who often identifies as a marginalized group, a group that has been marginalized, what that does. So I think it's also okay to convey your true feelings and not be worried about protecting those feelings with adults. Okay.
Well, how does that differ for children?
I think for children, it's really, for me, all about a teachable moment, right? I think, you have to have those age appropriate conversations. We're talking about Alden. So for me to go in a deep soliloquy and back in the 19th century, like, no, she's going to be like, I just want to be Moana. What are you talking about? Right. So I think you can say things, simple explanations like some costumes are inspired by cultures that are meaningful to people. And then starting to spark that imagination. Dressing up as a superhero or an animal is different than dressing up in someone else's traditional clothing that holds a special meaning because they're a part of that group. We, especially if it's your child, you can say, we are not a part of that culture, right? Just doing the we, and then again, helping them explore respectful choices, spark that creativity that Natani talked about. Creativity is so much a part of this, right? Is there something we can make? Is there something we can do together? That is so important so that they can steer clear of those that misrepresent or disrespect cultural practices. That's also going to really help them develop inclusionary ideas and empathy.
Yeah.
Early on. We don't want to forget about empathy. So that's what I would say about that one.
Ooh, can I add one more thing to that, Doc?
Yes.
It also made me think of, as a teacher or my EAs, we would discuss our costumes. So it's also what you model, right?
Yeah.
Like if I'm going to go in thinking it's cute and it's not cute, then I'm already telling my kids that it's not a big deal, right? So I think it also takes the teacher and the team that is directly working with the kids to be like, and it's getting significantly better. Like now people are box of crayons or, peanut butter and jelly, things that are cute and sweet. And that I think helps too, to help that team model what they would also want the kids to kind of, think of and share about their costumes or what they'd like to be.
Yeah.
Yes. I love that.
Absolutely.
So growing up in the US, my mom's her day job is different, but her passion is painting. And so most Halloweens, if she could get us to, we would make our costumes. And that's the ultimate form of self-expression. And if you get some Halloweens when we were really proud of our costumes, it was even better to wear, a self-made costume than even a store-bought one, even personally as a child, right? And so I think that's the ultimate nurturing of self-expression, is that to unpack what it is that the child wants to convey on Halloween or be or whatever, and then let's do it at home. And who cares, especially at 4, if it's wonky or whatever, right? It doesn't matter. The quality of the thing is just them having had agency in deciding and also creating it.
Yes.
Love that. That's so cool. Awesome. Well, so I'm curious, we've talked about the scenario with adults we have relationships with. We've talked about how to have this conversation and engage with children. What role do power dynamics and privilege play in cultural appropriation and appreciation, both obviously in the context of, you know, how you're going to talk about these choices with people, but also, you know, in your identity, in the identity, social identities you identify with and belong to, and those cultures that you don't belong to.
Yeah, I think, you know, we touched on it a little bit, right? People from dominant cultures often have the privilege of choosing how and when to engage with another culture without the associated risks or consequences that the originating culture might face, right? In that conversation, how do you call somebody in versus calling them out, right? For people from that originating culture, that could be a risk, you know, in terms of power dynamics and privilege, right? So, you know, this really highlights why appreciation should come from a place of learning and support rather than appropriation and selective borrowing. Yeah.
Great way to phrase it. Yeah.
This is where I feel like I'm coming back a little full circle, call back to the first question around appropriation versus appreciation. The power dynamic, I feel like, is at the core, right? Because if you think about appropriation in the kind of the corporate example, right, of the commodification of Halloween and how all of these, you know, large retailers and costumes, so they hold way more power, right, than any of the individual groups or people or anything like that, right? And so they, if anything, should have the added responsibility of being even more mindful, right? I mean, we say with great power comes great responsibility. If that is true of corporations as it is of humans, then, you know, even more, I feel like there needs to be a more kind of critical gauge. We need to really engage our critical thinking and critical lens and analysis when we're, you know, questioning whether something is a culture or a costume. I feel like if you have to question it, don't do it. You know what I mean? Don't do it. Right. If you have to ask somebody for permission, if you have to call a friend of that culture to say, can I wear this here?
Nope.
Maybe just avoid it. You know, that's what I feel like is my own litmus test.
Yeah. And I think when you talk about corporations and the responsibility that they have, I know I gave an example about, you know, Hollywood and an actress. I think Hollywood also has an equally power dynamics. People are looking to them. And Julianne Hough, who is on Dancing with the Stars, she won it and then became a judge on it. You know, she decided one year, because she was a fan of the show Orange is the New Black, there's a character called Crazy Eyes. Uzo Aduba is the actress who's brilliant, who plays that role, where she wears Bantu knots. And so Julianne Hough put her hair in Bantu knots, which is an African style, darkened her skin, right? For makeup, it's that same thing. And you know, that's where power dynamic comes from too. Lots of young people look to stars and as responsible people and would think, oh, then that's something I could and should be able to do as well. So the power dynamics and the privilege is really a place where this shows up. And if you are in that dominant role, you really have to be careful about the responsibility, earned or unearned, privilege, earned or unearned, that you do have over young folks.
And this is true for parents. Because parents hold a lot of power and privilege. To Natani's point, this is why what our teachers, like the adults in the lives of children, inherently, because of you being an adult, you hold more power and privilege, right? And so what you model
absolutely
holds a lot more power and privilege too for the child inherently.
Absolutely.
And that appreciation is like a constant thing you have to keep on top more than appropriation. Because if we really look at society as a whole, appropriation's like, so even talking about this in the power plays, right? Because it is on top. It's like, you know, that's what I know about it. And that's the biases and the stereotypes I'm going to hold. So that's how it is. And it's that I have to significantly amplify to my daughter and to young ones that, you know, okay, well, we need to do some more appreciation. Like, how does that look? We have to talk about that. And, you know, my daughter is amazing at, like, if there's books, like graphic novels that she'll see, and there was one where she saw like a headdress on somebody and she's like, oh, no, I don't want that. Like, I'm
Mhm.
right. So it's the dialogue you have, and parents, to your point, Rashi, so true. Parents and teachers and whoever we see kind of as a leader, or an adult for kids, right? An adult in their life hold a lot of that responsibility, and
Yeah.
you can do a lot of good with it, and you can also cause a lot of harm with it, or you can avoid it and be so silenced that it's like nothing you even
Yeah.
talk about, which is like worse.
Yeah.
So I think it's like amplifying and making it a mindful practice to appreciate, or the learning. It's learning and appreciation,
Yeah.
not no learning, right? Because appropriation means there's no learning, no education that has happened. You're
Right.
doing what other people have done because
Mhm.
just this one day. But I think it's that part of here talking today about that. It's an ongoing conversation. And when you see it pointed out, not just when it comes to Halloween.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
and culture is ultimately people, right? Culture is ultimately about people. And so if you want to have cultural appreciation, you need to have relationships with people. The relationships with people is how you learn about authentic cultures. You get invited into those cultural practices, those holidays, those celebrations, those rituals. It becomes a form of building a deeper, more intimate relationship with someone, and that person choosing to share their humanity, their culture with you. And so that entry point into how to have authentic cultural appreciation is really about building those genuine relationships where people feel welcome to share who they really are in those safe places, right? And so you know, I remember, like, I know Diwali is coming up, and one of our good friends invited us to her house for Diwali, and last year we went as well, and she has a daughter who's 5 years old, and she gave Alden a new outfit to wear. It was one of her old outfits, and it was just so special to be able to celebrate Diwali like in our friend's home with her actual, you know, gift of her clothing and the food. And it was so much more of that practice of cultural appreciation than even what I've done in the past, which is, you know, studying it, kind of removed from people, but studying the holiday. Actually being in the relationship, being in the home, being in the holiday, it like it changes the appreciation from this distance of studying or tourism, right, to actually being part of the relationship. And I'm not purchasing these little trinkets and things that are commodifying these holidays. I've been invited into the practice, and I'm being gifted these cultural symbols that are significant for her. So that's something that we want to uplift, right, for genuine cultural appreciation. And I want to close this out by asking each of you this question of, you know, what is one action you will take this Halloween season to promote cultural responsibility? What's one action? And I invite the folks in this webinar to also share in the chat. What's one thing or one takeaway even from this webinar that you can commit to practicing to promote cultural responsibility?
I can go first. I live in Austin, Texas. And our neighborhood is like big on Halloween. It's you know, all the adults come out and dress up, and so do the kids and everything. And so it's fun. And it's a really kind of collective communal experience. And if history is any indication, I will come across at least one appropriated costume and I will have a conversation, because also, like, I'm invested, right? Because these are my neighbors. And so it is worth my time and energy to actually understand why they're wearing what they're wearing, and for them to hear my perspective, even if it doesn't change anything in their behavior, right?
Yeah.
So that is something I have been doing since I've been living here, but I've, you know, also going to do this Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think one of the things that I'm going to do is share this webinar with folks. I'm going to put it on my social media, say, hey, I know tomorrow's the day, but check this out before you go. Sometimes my friends, are sharing with me, oh, I'm going to a Halloween party. I'm going to ask, what are you wearing? What are you wearing? So I think, to Rashi's point, those in my sphere of influence, I am going to use my social relationships and with folks and ask them and challenge them to do something different if it feels like cultural appropriation.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Evans.
For me, I think I said it already, but I just amplify and talk about it before it happens with like spaces my child's in, because that's a lot of where my investment comes from. So that always, at least the past couple of years has been an action step. Same thing as Doc. I, want to make sure that I share this to her teacher and just to people. I mean, it's already tomorrow, but they know because I brought it up at PTA meetings. And so I think that just kind of stays on top for me, just to keep saying it, keep making it a curiosity, but also kind of like we're not going to do this. So, and I'm saying it now, I'm not waiting till last minute to approach anybody and share that it will make people uncomfortable. And like, I don't want my daughter to be in the space where that's contributing to that. So
yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Natani. And thank you all for joining. Thank you for sharing in the chat.
Yes.
Please do join us for future webinars. If you would like to also offer some thoughts and ideas on other topics you would like us to cover and discuss together, you can complete this survey that's going to shape our 2025 webinar schedule. And if you want to do some one-on-one coaching with Dr. Evans, if you have a specific question, sign up for a free coaching session. And our next webinar is going to be with Rashi. Rashi, do you want to share a little bit about that? So folks.
Yes, our next webinar is going to be about giving and receiving feedback. This is a topic of curiosity and conversation that we encounter with lots and lots of people across the kind of organizational spectrum and role spectrum. And so if you've ever encountered a problem of practice around feedback where you either had to give or receive feedback and it felt uncomfortable, or you just wish you had a few more tools or skills or knowledge around it, then join us for that webinar. Our Senior Director of Learning, Carly Riley, is also going to be joining me on there. So it's going to be great.
And that is like it came up even in this webinar, right? Of like, how do we honor those feelings of anger and discomfort and really honestly share and make space for those feelings in a way that is going to be like honoring you and also productive in building that relationship. Feedback is not about ending relationships or burning bridges. It should actually build more intimacy and more trust. So I'm excited for that webinar and to continue learning with all of you. So thank you so much for contributing to this one and sharing your time and wisdom with us.
All right.
Happy Halloween. Happy Halloween. Happy Holly. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.